Hello everyone, and welcome to Dutch Greybeard. I normally read about 10 to 15 books every 2 months, which is some 4,500 to 5,000 pages. These past few months, my reading time was very limited because I was busy emptying my entire apartment, which I had sold. On August 29, the new owner would move in or start her renovation work. Had I moved into another house, things would also have been stressful but much better manageable. The thing is, and those of you who are regular visitors of my channel know this of course, that I chose to go and live in a motorhome, which meant that practically all of my stuff had to find a new home. And I, being who I am, find it important that mostly everything indeed finds a new home. Ever since the second week of May of this year, up until literally the last day of August 29, I have been busy with selling and giving away stuff. That sounds pretty straightforward, but I can tell you it's not. It comes down to an incredibly complicated logistic puzzle that has kept me occupied for more than 3 months. Starting with my enormous Book Unhaul and ending with emptying the last cupboard of my kitchen. Especially this last month has been simply crazy. I'm not complaining, but merely trying to illustrate my change of focus. Next to the simple lack of time, I had to deal with concentration issues. While reading, my mind would easily wander off into the many unknowns that awaited me and still await me. Where can I find a place for my motorhome? Will I be able to pull it off, emptying my apartment on time? How on earth am I going to get the huge furniture and heavy machines down those stairs? What can I take with me and what not? How will I experience the winters? And so on and so forth. This is why I've chosen to read not too demanding books these past few months. The relentless walking of the stairs, 3 stories down and up and down and up. My apartment building does not have an elevator. With heavy stuff, finally took its toll on my body. The day before August 29, my left knee snapped, and at the same time my back said crack. But it is done. The dragging, hauling and carrying down and up those stairs lie in the past. I have left the place where I lived for 10 years and am starting a new chapter. At this moment, I'm staying at my girlfriend's place, where the most important portion of my books behind me now live. Almost all the books you see here are my to-be-read books. Only one part holds the fantasy I have read since January of 2023. That's this section of the bookcase. Can you see that? Yeah, you can see that. All the other books that I simply could not part with are put away in storage. This long introduction is to explain why, instead of my usual 12 or 13 books, I now have to report on only 8 books that I have read during July and August, and 1 book that I did not finish. Altogether, I read 3,727 pages. It was a bit of a mixed bag, with a couple of very good books, although no 5 stars, and some books I didn't much care for. You are used of me showing a chart of the books I've read, but one of the changes with this moving stuff is that I lost one part of very essential software in which I made all these overviews. I will get back to that, but for this video I have to skip that part for once. Hopefully next time I will be fully up and running again. Let's go through the books in the order in which I read them. The first book I want to talk about is An Echo of Things to Come by James Islington. This one has 729 pages and I read it between the 1st and 22nd of July. This is the second book in the Lud-in-the-Mist trilogy, and my reading experience of it suffered a little because of my work on the apartment. The book demanded more concentration than I had available most of the time. That is partly why it took me almost 3 weeks to read it. The prologue immediately drew me into the book, and the first half really kept me on the edge of my seat. I even had some Name of the Wind vibes at times. Also, there's a lot more banter than in the first book, which is pretty serious. I did find that the story kept on expanding and diverging. The pacing of the story was good, but I was ready for some converging and explaining. In particular, the Caden chapters, where his memory is jogged and we get new information about his background, were demanding and somewhat of a chore to read. Although one chapter, in particular chapter 11, where we learn about Caden's wife, was extremely gripping and strong. Also, the multitude of characters and new information about Caden's past got confusing. I encountered the same issue I had with the Fionnavar Tapestry, Guy Gavriel Kay's debut trilogy. Too much lore, too detailed, too many factions, each with their different background and intent. In short, too complex. I enjoyed the chapters with Davian and Asha the best. At some point, I could only hope that all this diverging would come together in the end somehow. Still, the book got better with each chapter and kept on impressing me. Many of the dialogues are strong and beautiful. Despite the effort this book demands, I rated it with 89 points out of 100. It is a great book, which further lays the groundwork for what has to be a memorable ending. Still, I decided to pause my reading of this trilogy. I feel that this is exactly my kind of fantasy, and I want to be able to fully savor it. Once the stress level in my brain and body has normalized again somewhat, I will pick up the final book in this series. Thankfully, it has a recap of the previous two books, so I can refresh my memory before diving into the final 900 or so pages. The second book I read is Lud-in-the-Mist by Hope Mirrlees. 264 pages. I read it between 22 and 27 of July. I've published a separate reading experience video for this book, so for now I'll keep it brief. My quest for pre-Tolkien fantasy was dwindling until Rabin, from the channel Only the Best Fantasy Novels, gave a raving review of Lud-in-the-Mist by Hope Mirrlees, which was published in 1926. This rekindled my curiosity for pre-Tolkien fantasy. The author mainly wrote poetry, which you can see in her high-caliber prose. Many times, her writing took me back to the brilliance of the prose of writers like Marcel Proust. Not just her style, but also her calmness and profundity in attempting to truly capture a feeling, an experience, or a life lesson. Still, the age of this book betrays itself every time the author peeks around the corner, directly addressing the reader. The highly symbolical story is entertaining and even touching at times. Lud-in-the-Mist is without any doubt the best pre-Tolkien fantasy I have read so far. I gave Lud-in-the-Mist 88 points out of 100. It is an intellectual read, and even though the book doesn't easily give away its secrets, it provided me with a thrilling reading experience. A book I will think back on for quite some time. This is the book I did not finish. This was extremely disappointing, because I'd been looking forward to reading this book since I had bought it at the beginning of 2023. I recall picking it up several times to start reading it, but putting it back on the shelf after reading the first line, which was very confusing. I read this book together with my good friend BJ Minton, and we both struggled with the mystifying prose and the rather directionless story. When I was about 130 pages into the book, I decided to read Age of Myth, the next book in this wrap-up. I flew through those 430 pages, which made me wonder why I allowed myself to struggle with a book. After the Michael J. Sullivan, I picked up The Dreaming Tree again, but found that even after 4 days, I could not get into the story at all anymore. The prose was so strange to me that I couldn't force myself any longer to push through. Perhaps I'll pick it up again at a later date, but one glance at the many promising books on my TBR, I highly doubt that I ever will. After having read the first 2 books in the Rhaeria Chronicles by this author, I followed the preferred reading order and picked up Age of Myth. This is the first book in the Legends of the First Empire, a 6-book series. As I'm recording this video, I'm reading the 3rd book in the series, Age of War. This is the kind of book I'm looking for to read during stressful times. Sullivan's prose is very accessible and his stories are always good. I'm way behind with my videos, which I will amend very soon, but I will be making a separate reading experience video on the first 3 books in this series. After reading the 2nd chapter, I write in the margin, "Loving it. Just a story, probably a very good story, told in an accessible but clever way, in well cared for prose, without unnecessary barriers." With every MJS book, I have to say it, his dialogues are the best. Naturally flowing, as if he has copied them from real life somewhere. I had a great time with Sullivan's prose and storytelling. I gave Age of Myth 92 points out of 100. The book no doubt is different from the Rhaeria books, but it is certainly not less interesting or less well written. Like the Rhaeria series, this book is very well written with powerful dialogues, convincing characters and a captivating, multifaceted story. If I would have to name one downside of this book, it would have to be the lousy print quality. My copy literally fell apart while I was reading it. On a whim, I bought the first 4 books in the insanely popular Dungeon Crawler Carl series on audio. I listened to the first book between June 18 and August 5, and I'm sorry to say that I have not joined the fandom. And halfway through the 2nd book, I don't think I will. I believe I'm unfit for lit RPG or progression fantasy or whatever it is called nowadays. To me, the story is nothing more than killing to survive and then leveling up and upgrading your inventory, and that on repeat all the time. The monsters and the weaponry vary, but that, in my experience, is pretty much it. Also, the much praised humour simply doesn't really work for me. I like Princess Donut, and Carl is okay, but nothing extraordinary. I wish it were different, but I could not give this a higher rating than 59 points out of 100, where the narration by Jeff Hayes scores most of those points. It is mildly entertaining, which is why I still continue listening to it. But if nothing drastically happens story-wise, I'm afraid that's all I can make of it. Mildly entertaining. Immediately after Age of Myth, I started reading Age of Swords, the 2nd book in the series. In 1 week, I devoured the almost 500 pages. The story takes the groundwork from the first book to a whole new level. I love how inventions are made in this Bronze Age setting, which every time are groundbreaking. Much in the story is impressive, and much in the prose is beautiful and memorable. This writer keeps on rising in my esteem. He writes the exact kind of fantasy I love to read. As mentioned, I will make a dedicated reading experience video for the trilogy as a whole, so I won't elaborate too much right now. Like it should be, this 2nd book slightly tops the first one for me. With 93 points out of 100, it is very close to a 5-star. I then picked up The Talons of Earth by Anne McCaffrey. So far I've only read 2 of her Pern trilogies and was eager to read some of her science fiction. I read the 3 books in the absolute busiest time of my move, but they were exactly what I needed. Not demanding, easy to read, and nothing much to get confused about. McCaffrey wrote the books in different times of her writing career. The first book, To Ride Pegasus, was first published in 1973 when she had only published 2 of her Pern books. Pegasus in Flight, book number 2, was published in 1991, so 18 years after the first book, And it took another 9 years for her to publish the final book in the series, Pegasus in Space. I read all 3 of them back to back, simply because they were excellent deviations from my daily towing, dragging and stair climbing. I didn't like the first book very much, to be honest. The story is very meagre, but it is mainly the premise that kept me interested. Henry Darrow is the first to explore the huge wealth of psychic gifts hidden among people. He forms the Parapsychic Center, where so-called talents can train and be legalized within society, that doesn't really know yet how to deal with empathy, precognition, telekinesis, and many other talents. This premise of these talented people who have the ability to make life on Earth much more pleasant was for me the driving force to read these books. The prose style of To Ride Pegasus is very flashy, with rather forced wittiness in the dialogues. A little bit of a cool detective style prose, which didn't very much appeal to me. Also, some of the antagonists are very flat characters who simply oppose all Henry Darrow is trying to achieve. Much of the plot, if one can even speak of there being a plot, rambles on about this law Henry and his team are trying to get passed, which protects talents from lawsuits because of their aid. Like I mentioned, society is not entirely ready for these alienating skills that may benefit some and not others. While new talents are discovered and more major incidents are happening which involve talented people, the story sort of trods along with seemingly secondary storylines taking center stage, where they lose themselves in details. Other than the law, there is nothing the story progresses forwards, and I found that disappointing. I gave the 284 pages of To Ride Pegasus 61 points out of 100. Because a nice and interesting premise does not necessarily make a good book. It needs a real story and preferably also good prose. The book lacks in those 2 departments. The second book, Pegasus in Flight, takes place 2 generations after the first book. Risa Owen is the granddaughter of the first director of the Parapsychic Center, and she has followed in his footsteps. The book starts off in a much more interesting way, with at least the start of a story. Also, the setting of the overcrowded Earth, with almost a post-apocalyptic feel to it, is much more poignant than it was in the first book. Still, the prose is not exactly top-notch, with regular tongue-twisting and incomprehensible sentences. Also, McCaffrey has a tendency to use fancy words such as intransigence, I don't even know how you pronounce that, or instantaneity. But apart from that, the story is interesting. A couple of young children are located through telepathic or other talents that turn out to be extremely powerful talents. Peter Ridinger, a boy in a paralyzed body, has telekinetic powers beyond anything anyone has ever seen. And the streetwise Tirla is such a strong empath that she can speak anyone's language fluently, instantly. Parallel with the goings-on of the centre is the story of how the first space station is built, from where the exploration for habitable planets can finally begin. The building manager, from Russian origin, Ludmila Barchenka, is again an extremely flat character. Obsessive about finishing her project on time and within budget, she literally goes over dead bodies. She's extremely unreasonable and highly insulting. There is a small plot going on about child abduction in which Tirla and Peter play a major part in catching the perpetrators. But other than that, the story again trods along, finding new talents, the building of the space station, a kidnapping in between, and the final resolution of that. This book is much more enjoyable than the first because at least something is happening, but there still doesn't seem to be any overarching major plot going on, which ultimately is fine because the premise of the amazing things the talents can pull off is entertaining enough. like the many telepathic dialogues which make the interactions in groups with non-telepathic people much fun to read. I gave Pegasus in Flight 83 points out of 100. I have the same dislikes as I did with the first book, but this one is much more enjoyable. Even though the books in this series so far lacked any true plot, I continued on with the third and final one, Pegasus in Space. With 520 pages in a smaller font size than the previous two books, it is the largest of the bunch. The build-up of the story is strange, to say the least. Ludmila Barchenka has finished her station, but she has devious plans, being the single-minded antagonist that she is. This storyline culminates at around page 75. After that, there is no plot to speak of, and the story trods on again. We find an interesting new talent who eventually turns out to have a healing talent that thus far has been unheard of. The rest of the book is very entertaining, with the development of the telekinetic range of Peter Reidinger and others with the same talent. There is a sabotage which is investigated, and the increasing role of telekinetic talents play the main part in this play. It is almost a bit of a soap, with trusted characters going their way in life. At times the author loses herself in too elaborate scientific explanations, at least for me, with an overdose of abbreviations. There are tender moments between characters and miraculous displays of talents. All in all, I am amazed at the way Anne McCaffrey chose to write this story, with, again, hardly any plot to speak of, as if this were a serialized novel that was unaltered, copied into book form. The telekinesis and the other talents kept me as a reader interested. But it seems to me as if the author didn't really think beyond this premise to make it into an enthralling story. Even though it very much entertained me, I found this book slightly less than number 2. I gave it 80 points out of 100. Sometimes books don't have to be overwhelmingly good to do what they have to do. And that's exactly what the Talent series by Anne McCaffrey did for me. In times when my mind wandered off too easily, I could still read some entertaining pages without fussing too much about any plot. Even though I didn't read as much as I usually do, I still enjoyed my reading. Not all of the books were very good, but even then I still enjoyed my time with them. 8 books and 1 DNF. Have you read any of them? How was your reading experience? Love to hear your thoughts. My average rating for these 2 months is exactly 80 points out of 100, with 59 points for Dungeon Crawler Carl being the lowest and 93 points for Age of Swords being the highest. Reading will always be a part of my days, no matter how busy or preoccupied I may be with other things. Still, I hope that from now on I can better focus on whatever book I'm reading. It's not just the books that deserve this, I deserve it as well. Thank you very much for watching this video. Until we meet again at Dutch Greybeard.